What was initially expected to be a crucial, perhaps career-defining qualifying session at the Japanese Grand Prix spiraled into something entirely different. A dramatic clash of narratives that centered around two very different drivers under the Red Bull umbrella. On one side stood Yuki Tsunoda, the local hero carrying the weight of an entire nation's expectations, a man under immense pressure to prove that he deserves his recently confirmed spot in the elite Red Bull racing lineup. On the other stood Liam Lawson, the so-called discarded talent, labeled by many as a reserve driver with no seat and little hope, who, against all odds, came out swinging and shattered every prediction thrown his way. In a stunning twist that no one in the paddock could have foreseen, the session ended with Tsunoda, Red Bull's officially chosen driver, sitting behind Lawson in the timing sheets. This result wasn't just unexpected. It was embarrassing. It was puzzling. It was the kind of performance gap that turns heads, raises eyebrows, and sends ripples through the entire organization. Fans took to social media in confusion, analysts were left scrambling for explanations, and even insiders from within Red Bull's walls reportedly struggled to hide their concern. What exactly was going wrong with Yuki Tsunoda? The answer, or at least part of it, unfolded brutally in Q2. That particular segment of qualifying transformed into a complete train wreck, a meltdown that exposed far more than just a lack of pace. What once seemed like a temporary glitch is now starting to look like a deeper technical flaw in the RB21. And within the team, there's growing anxiety that these aren't just isolated hiccups but potentially long-term vulnerabilities that could haunt them in the races to come. For a driver like Tsunoda, already walking a tightrope to justify his promotion, the implications are enormous, and not in a good way. Once again, the dark legend surrounding Red Bull's second seat emerged from the shadows. The inconsistency, the pressure, the revolving door of drivers unable to hold the spot for long. This qualifying session felt like history repeating itself in the worst possible way. If the current trend holds, then Red Bull isn't just facing a performance issue, they're confronting a structural identity crisis. How long before someone in the upper ranks demands a change? Nobody could reasonably argue that Red Bull walked away from this qualifying session with their heads held high. Tsunoda didn't even make it to Q3, a massive failure on home soil that left him stranded in P15 on the starting grid, a result so far beneath expectations that it raised uncomfortable questions about his future. Meanwhile, Liam Lawson, the man who wasn't even supposed to be here, quietly and surgically outpaced him and ended up in a sensational fourth place. Fourth. For a driver many thought would be watching the season from the sidelines, that kind of result isn't just impressive. It's narrative-shattering. And just when things couldn't get worse, the humiliation piled on. The Racing Bulls, Red Bull's own sister team, managed to qualify ahead of the senior team's supposed star. Even more damning was the performance of young Isaac, who shocked the paddock by not only making it into Q3 but snatching P7, ahead of none other than Lewis Hamilton. That alone should send sirens blaring through the Red Bull garage. That lap from Isaac, and the overall performance from Racing Bulls, forces a harsh question. Is the junior team's car actually more functional? More balanced? More adaptable to aggressive, hungry young drivers like Hajar and Lawson? It certainly looked that way. While the senior team fumbled and stumbled, the so-called development squad looked razor-sharp, capitalizing on every opportunity the track presented. All the while, the ever-watchful figure of Christian Horner observed it all. The Red Bull boss, a master of keeping his cards close to his chest, was visibly engaged throughout the session. When media members inevitably asked about the obvious elephant in the room, the fact that Lawson had convincingly outperformed Tsunoda, his response was as calculated as it was diplomatic. He didn't lash out. He didn't defend with passion either. What came through instead was a measured acknowledgment of the situation, neither condemning Tsunoda outright nor praising him with any real conviction. His remarks hinted at what everyone already sensed. Tsunoda's critical mistake came early, during his entry into Turn 1, where he carried excessive speed and compromised his entire lap. From that point forward, it was a desperate scramble to recover time that simply wasn't there to reclaim. In stark contrast, Lawson handled his outing with surgical precision. Composed. Clinical. Every apex, every breaking point, every ounce of grip extracted. While Tsunoda battled the car and the pressure, Lawson seemed to be working in harmony with the machinery beneath him. He looked fast. He looked in control. He looked like someone who absolutely deserves another shot in a main seat. A closer examination of Tsunoda's final Q2 attempt only deepens the mystery. His lap was doomed before it even began. The signs were there: tire temperature issues, poor setup, mental overload, or perhaps all of the above. By the time the lap actually started, it was already slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to salvage it. What we're left with is a brutal contrast. One driver with everything to lose crumbling under pressure, and another who was meant to be forgotten, proving that he never should have been dismissed in the first place. The storyline practically writes itself, and it's far too compelling to ignore. So now Red Bull stands at a crossroads once again. One more chapter in the ongoing saga of their second-seat dilemma. The revolving door continues to spin, and Liam Lawson might just be the one ready to kick it down entirely. If the higher-ups are watching, and rest assured they are, this qualifying session might become the turning point that reshapes the team's future. The storm is coming, and Lawson might be riding at the front of it. From the very moment he exited the pit lane, it was clear that Yuki Tsunoda's car was not behaving the way a Formula One machine should when everything is on the line. The Japanese driver found himself wrestling the steering wheel almost immediately, forced to make micro-corrections before he even had a chance to begin building speed. That is not how you set the stage for a flying lap in a cutthroat qualifying session, especially not at your home Grand Prix, under the scrutiny of your national audience and the ever-watchful Red Bull hierarchy. The window of opportunity was already paper-thin, and the fact that he was sent out for his final push lap on a set of scrubbed soft tires only compounded his disadvantage. His deficit to Verstappen's benchmark time at that moment stood at a glaring 0.610 seconds, a figure that, in raw numbers, might not look catastrophic by Formula One standards, but when you're walking on a tightrope of setup fragility, tire sensitivity, and mental pressure, it's enough to send your entire rhythm into a downward spiral. Up until that point in the weekend, Yuki had done a commendable job keeping his time gaps to his teammate within a margin of 1 to 3/10. But when the moment of truth arrived and the pressure intensified, the pace vanished without a trace. When later asked about what had gone wrong, Tsunoda tried to rationalize the experience, attributing the issues to the car's razor-thin operational window, a range so narrow that everything, especially tire warm-up, needed to be executed with surgical precision. And that tiny detail, that elusive perfect warm-up phase, may have been the fatal flaw that doomed his session. On his second attempt in Q2, Tsunoda admitted he couldn't replicate the optimal outlap, the preparatory lap that gets the tires and brakes into their ideal working zone. Instead of attacking the track, he found himself searching for grip, for balance, for confidence. But when you realize you've missed the window in Formula One, it's already too late. You're no longer chasing the stopwatch, you're chasing ghosts. To make matters worse, as if fate itself had a cruel sense of timing, a red flag was thrown mid-session, completely obliterating what little rhythm Tsunoda had left. Red flags are part of the sport. Every driver has to deal with them. But when you're in a car like the RB21, which operates best only under extremely specific conditions, any interruption can detonate your session entirely. And that's exactly what happened. The momentum he had been painstakingly trying to build was torn apart, leaving him stranded and unable to recover. Whatever shot he had at making Q3 was gone in an instant. It's a bitter pill to swallow, especially for a driver who entered this season with renewed expectations and a bright spotlight aimed directly at him in Suzuka. Instead of rising, Tsunoda finds himself slipping into a familiar downward trajectory. Technical glitches, psychological pressure, increasing public comparisons to Lawson, and the steady climb of emerging drivers like Hajar are forming a perfect storm around him. And if something doesn't change quickly, the noise around his future will only get louder. The season is still young, but the warning signs are flashing red. Red Bull, a team not known for patience, may be staring down another uncomfortable decision regarding their driver lineup, a decision that might not just alter the grid but could trigger ripple effects throughout the entire structure of the Red Bull racing empire. There's no sugarcoating the outcome. At his home Grand Prix, in front of the fans who worship him, Yuki Tsunoda was the slowest driver from the entire Red Bull family. That humiliating distinction now hangs around his neck, but is it fair to place all the blame on his shoulders? A deeper inspection suggests that Tsunoda was already hamstrung before the weekend even began. The car he was given in Suzuka bore critical differences from the rest of the Red Bull-powered machines. And that raises a brutally awkward question. Why on earth would Red Bull knowingly place one of their own drivers at a disadvantage? Whispers in the paddock about setup discrepancies began long before the lights went out. Everyone knew Tsunoda was running a less aggressive configuration, and the visual evidence was undeniable the moment eyes landed on the massive rear wing bolted to the back of his car. This was no aesthetic flourish, it was a strategic choice. The oversized rear appendage symbolized a team decision to give Yuki more downforce, a setup meant to provide more stability and ease of handling. In theory, that might sound like a gift. In practice, it was a handicap. The trade-off was brutal. More downforce equals more drag. More drag means less top speed. And in the cutthroat margins of modern Formula One, where tenths are the difference between triumph and irrelevance, that kind of performance trade is nothing short of sabotage. To make the situation even more damning, Tsunoda had been granted a fresh set of soft tires for his final Q2 run, and yet he could only improve by a paltry 1.5 tenths compared to his earlier attempt on used rubber. For a driver battling to prove his worth in one of the most ruthless environments in motorsport, that level of stagnation is psychologically crushing. Ted Kravitz from Sky Sports didn't mince words in his post-qualifying analysis. He flat-out stated that Yuki couldn't have done more, pointing the finger directly at that rear wing. While Verstappen was busy humiliating the McLarens and grabbing pole, Tsunoda was sinking in a car that seemed built to fail. But the comparisons between Yuki and Max are almost meaningless, like comparing apples to aerospace-grade oranges. The differences in setup between their cars weren't subtle, they were chasms. Kravitz drilled into the technical specifics. Yuki's rear wing had a dramatically steeper angle, translating into significantly higher downforce levels. Christian Horner had spoken earlier about giving Tsunoda a car that was more predictable, less likely to bite unexpectedly. In plain terms, Red Bull didn't trust him to tame the same beast Max was driving. That wasn't just a matter of engineering, it was a verdict on his capabilities. The contrast between the two cars was almost laughable. Max's machine looked like a surgical weapon, low drag and sleek, engineered to cut through the air with ruthless efficiency. Yuki's, in comparison, looked like it was towing a barn door. The difference was so stark that it bordered on satire. But beneath that visual joke lay a disturbing truth. Red Bull did not believe their Japanese driver was capable of handling the same high-risk, high-reward machinery as their golden boy. That implication isn't just damning, it's devastating. Because in a team like Red Bull, where performance is king and perception shapes destiny, being seen as the weak link isn't a temporary label. It's a ticking clock. And unless Yuki Tsunoda can reverse this downward trend quickly, very quickly, he may soon find himself out of time in a system that doesn't forgive, doesn't forget, and certainly doesn't wait. Red Bull, whether consciously or not, effectively shackled one of its own drivers, crippling his chances not through lack of talent, but through fear. A fear of what might happen if he were handed a truly competitive machine and allowed to fight on equal footing. That type of institutional doubt doesn't just demoralize, it crushes careers. And what makes this scenario even more painfully ironic is that Tsunoda himself appeared relatively satisfied with his machinery during the initial free practice sessions. He even delivered promising lap times during Q1. But, as always in Formula One, the pressure amplifier of Saturday afternoon qualifying revealed cracks that had been hiding beneath the surface. Red Bull's gamble, aiming to give him a safer, more forgiving car setup, came back to haunt them at precisely the worst moment. The expectations surrounding the Japanese driver were monumental, especially with the spotlight of Suzuka burning intensely above him. A top-3 finish may have been the dream. But starting from 15th on the grid, with the entire midfield stacked tighter than a sardine can, that dream has rapidly devolved into fantasy. At this point, his best shot might lie in a chaotic race. Some rain, some carnage, a few lucky breaks. Without that, even a handful of points seems ambitious. But beyond setups and tire choices, there's a much darker, more volatile element at play. The psychological war happening behind the scenes. Because the most dangerous thing for a driver isn't necessarily a poorly balanced car, it's the subtle erosion of trust. When the people backing you begin to cast doubts, disguise criticism as praise, or start managing expectations in public, the mental toll can be devastating. While Tsunoda was being quietly doubted and tactfully undermined, Liam Lawson was given time, freedom to grow without the same suffocating expectations. And then there's the infamous justification for why Yuki was promoted instead of Lawson. According to Red Bull's internal logic, experience was deemed more important. Tsunoda, they claimed, could contribute immediate technical feedback during a development-heavy season. Lawson, they argued, might have needed 5 to 7 races to get up to speed, time they insisted they simply didn't have. But now, in the harsh glare of reality, it's starting to look like they bet on the wrong horse. And instead of giving Tsunoda equal tools and full backing, the team resorted to damage control setups and public relations gymnastics. The result? A driver boxed in from all sides. Not even a home Grand Prix advantage could protect him from being outpaced. Instead of easing his learning curve, Red Bull made it steeper with their own choices. The team can claim they're sheltering him with conservative setups, but it only raises further doubts about whether they ever truly believed in him to begin with. In the high-stakes poker game that is Formula One, Red Bull might be playing their hand far too cautiously. If the situation doesn't change soon, they may be forced to fold completely on Yuki. After long internal talks and strategic huddles behind closed doors, the team came to a tough conclusion. The hesitation had to end. The time for half measures was over. They needed to rip the bandage off and make a firm decision, and that's exactly what they did. Yuki was given a shot. He showed early flashes of control and promise in practice. But as attention shifts again toward Lawson, it becomes clear that not everyone inside the organization is thrilled at the idea of bringing him back into the main squad either. For Lawson, the situation remains complex. Despite being one of the most talked-about young prospects in the Red Bull Junior program, he doesn't seem particularly eager to jump back in, unless the conditions are exactly right. His ambition isn't just to wear a Red Bull badge again. He wants to prove beyond all doubt that he belongs at the very top, and to do it on his own terms. The truth is, the Racing Bull's car appears to suit his driving style much more organically. It offers a broader operating window and is generally more forgiving. Meanwhile, the RB21, the crown jewel of the Red Bull arsenal, demands near perfection to unlock its full potential. And right now, the comparison between the junior squad based in Faenza and the main team is beginning to look less like an interesting footnote and more like a straight-up embarrassment. Here's the hard reality. While a Racing Bull's car made it into Q3, both Red Bulls were eliminated in Q2. That alone is a massive warning sign. It paints a troubling picture of misalignment, instability, and possibly internal friction within the Red Bull ecosystem. It raises an uncomfortable question. How can the so-called junior team be faster in qualifying than the elite operation built to win championships? Reflecting on his potential return to Red Bull and his larger ambitions in Formula One, Lawson has acknowledged the rumors and chatter. Just a year ago, he didn't even have a seat. He was a ghost in the garage, wishing for an opportunity. So now, for him, it's about being in a car, any car, and seizing the moment to show he belongs. That's where his head is at. The idea of rejoining Red Bull is on the table, but his focus hasn't shifted. He's still determined to prove that he deserves that seat, and this time, he intends to earn it on his own terms. Meanwhile, the pressure on Tsunoda continues to climb. Former world champion Jacques Villeneuve didn't mince words. He believes Tsunoda is now paying the price for the strategic choices Red Bull made regarding his car's setup. What might have been intended as a protective measure has backfired badly. Instead of boosting confidence, it's killed his rhythm and decimated his qualifying performance. Let's be brutally clear. Red Bull asked the impossible of him. Climb into a car built to someone else's specifications, perform instantly, and do it within a 5-race window. That's the deadline Helmut Marko has publicly set. If results don't show in that short span, the writing is on the wall. When Red Bull declares a season lost, they don't just regroup, they execute radical change. And here's where the dominoes could really start to fall. If Red Bull fails to field a package capable of fighting for victories consistently, Max Verstappen may start surveying the horizon. And make no mistake, he won't be short of suitors. Paddock chatter already hints that both Aston Martin and Mercedes are preparing massive offers that could tempt the reigning champion to walk. If Red Bull slips, even slightly, Verstappen could be the first one through the exit door. Which brings us full circle, back to the dismal qualifying session in Suzuka. Can Yuki bounce back? Can he rewrite the narrative with a gutsy race performance that reminds everyone why he was given a shot in the first place? From P15 on one of the tightest, most unforgiving grids we've seen in years, his path forward is narrow. He'll need a flawless strategy, perfect execution, and maybe even divine intervention. Rain, chaos, a lucky safety car. That might be his only way back into the points. There are countless variables to examine in what went wrong. Setup decisions, tire strategy, mental load, and upper management politics. But one truth stands out above all. This wasn't just a mechanical issue. There is a profound psychological cost when a team undermines a driver's window of performance, alters their machinery for safety, and gives them a shrinking timeline to prove their worth. And let's not forget, Lawson was never subjected to the same pressure. He was given time. He was told to learn. Tsunoda, on the other hand, was essentially told, perform now, or it's over. Now we want to hear your take. What's your opinion on Yuki Tsunoda's disappointing qualifying performance in Japan? And more importantly, do you believe he can turn it around on race day and remind the world of the talent he displayed during his highlights with Racing Bulls? Let us know in the comments below. And once you're done, don't forget to click the video on screen now for even deeper insights behind the scenes of Formula One.